Okay, guys, I think everyone's here, so we're going to start. Welcome back. It's really lovely to see everyone again. Let's jump right into things. We have so much to talk about. So last class, we discussed how there's the middle section of Sefer Devarim, like the main meat, and it's the Torah section, the law section, divided up into three parts: mitzvot, chukim, and mishpatim. And last week we did the mitzvah and chukim section, the rituals. And today we're going to focus all of our attention on the mishpatim, the universal laws, ethical laws about morality, about how to create the most just society. There are so many laws, we're not going to get to most of them. What I'm going to do for you really quickly is just tell you every single law. I went through and I just started writing down and scribbling every single pasuk. It's going to almost sound like in Megillat Esther when you mention Haman's sons who were hanged, and you say it really, really quickly in one breath. That's sort of what I'm going to try to do right now, just to give you an idea. And I'm sure most of you can even probably guess what are going to be some of the laws that we're going to see that relate to building a society. Just throw it out. Unmute yourself. Just take a wild guess. You're probably going to be correct. It's going to be in there.
Repeat the question.
Sorry. What are going to be some of the laws, do you think, are going to be the laws about creating an ethical, just society? Right? So remember, not ritualistic, nothing pertaining to being Am Yisrael, but how to build a society in general. What type of laws do we need?
Respect minority rights.
Okay, protecting rights, exactly.
Yeah.
Fair justice for all.
Fair justice for all, we're going to see that. Exactly.
Respect for others.
Exactly. We're going to see, how do you respect others? Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? So these are, okay, so now I'm going to go through that list really quickly. Okay, we're going to see the roles of the government, the different institutions, the role of the Navi, the king, the Shofet, we'll go through that. Then we're going to see the law of Ir Miklat, a city of refuge. We're going to talk about that you need witnesses in a court of justice. We're going to discuss the laws of war, the unsolved murder mystery, the captive woman, the hated wife, the Ben Sorer Umora, the defiant son, returning lost property, cross-dressing, Shiluach Hakan, shooing away a mother bird from its egg, building a fence on a roof so that no one falls off, shotness, mixing linen and wool, wearing fringes. What if someone gets married and finds out their wife is not a virgin? Adultery, rape, prohibited sexual relationships, mamzer, someone born of an illicit sexual relationship, intermarriage, prostitution, divorce, stealing, sara'at, intergenerational punishment, receiving lashes, yibum, harming other people, remembering Amalek, and then giving bikurim and ma'aser, charity. Now, some of these made sense. Okay, I'd say most of them made sense. There are a few, I don't know if you caught them, that you're probably wondering, what is this doing in a mishpatim section? They sound like they should be in a chukim section. Did anyone catch any of those that maybe like you were like, wait a minute, why is that there?
Linen and wool.
Thank you, like shotness, right? And cross-dressing and shiluach hakan. What are they doing here? So we're going to have to look at those and try to figure out how to reframe them. Okay, recontextualize them to fit in with our section. Okay, also the last two, bikurim and maaser, we've already discussed them before because they're rituals that you do in the Beit HaMikdash, but here we're going to see them in a totally new light. So we're going to keep in mind as we read through some of these psukim what the section is and what it's trying to do, and that will actually help us understand some of these laws on a much more pshat, plain level, without all the parshanut that we've been used to our entire lives. Okay, first, let's start with the structure of government. Oh, hold on a second. First, we'll start with this. All of these laws deal with every single element within a society. The laws about the individual, about the family, the smaller community, okay, the larger society, and then how to relate to others outside of your society, non-Jews. So we could take each one of those laws that I just said, and they all fit into one of these categories. So we're really covering all of our bases here. And now let's take a look at the 4 branches of leadership, okay? We're first going to be introduced to the shoftim, the judges. We're going to then learn about another role of the kohanim. Then we're going to talk about the king, and then finally the navi, the prophet. These 4 institutions, okay, what we're going to see, I'm kind of giving it away now, are all going to balance each other and serves as checks and balances. And it's a very fascinating thing to see how the text limits their power, okay? Who has power, how is their power limited, and how do they use their power? So let's get right into it because there's a lot to do. I hope we get through everything. The first text that we have starts with Shoftim v'shotrin titen lecha b'chol she'arecha asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha l'shivtecha v'shavtu et ha'am mishpat tzedek. So you must appoint shoftim and shotrim. I'm purposely not going to translate that right now. That's part of our question. In all of your gates, in order that they can deal righteously with the people and do righteous judgment. And then the psukim continue how they can't take any bribes and they can't recognize people. And tzedek tirdof, one of the most famous psukim from Sefer Devarim, they have to justice, you shall follow or pursue. Great. So we have that first introduction. Okay. And then there's a break in the text. I'm not going to tell you yet what's in that break. Hold on. And then we learn that in case these shoftim that you have appointed to yourself amongst yourselves do not know the law. Ki yepale mimcha davar mishpat. If something is too hard for them to understand, then what do they go? Where do they go? They go to El Hamakom Asher Yivchar Adonai Elohecha Bo. They go to Yerushalayim, and there they meet the Kohanim and the Leviim and the Shofet. So there's one individual Shofet who's there, and they ask him and they inquire, and they have to follow whatever he does. Min Hamakom Hahu Asher Yivchar Adonai. From that space, so from that spot in Yerushalayim comes the ultimate judgment. Okay. So what we have here is a 2-tiered judicial system. We have the local court, which is B'chol Sherecha. You see, I put that in orange on the top. And that is conflated with Hamakom Asher Yivchar Hashem on the bottom. 2 locations, 2 different groups. Your first, the first person you go to is the one in your local court. And after that, do you go to the higher authority? Let's call it the Supreme Court. Now, who are these people? Who's doing the appointing? And why is it in your gates? Who are these shoftim and shotrim? And there are 2 different ways to read this, okay? 2 different shitot, okay, for understanding shoftim and shotrim. One way is to read them as one phrase. There's shoftim and shotrim. That's a group. It's one group of people. Okay. And what does it mean? A shofet we know is a judge. And a shoter, not to be confused with now in Israel, we use the word shoter to be a policeman. That's not a policeman, but rather it's someone who's educated in the law, someone who's an official who understands the law and could explain it. Who might that person be? Right? Just think about it a second. The entire Sefer Devarim is about reading the laws, learning the laws, transmitting the laws. So this group of people has to be a group of people who are highly literate, highly educated. They know the law very, very well, and they frequently sit at the gates. Anyone want to take a jab at it? What group of people would fall into that category of knowing the law well? So if I had more time, I would show you throughout Sefer Devarim or the Torah even, who sits by the gates, and it's actually the Leviim. We see that very commonly, that Leviim are sitting by the gates, and they fit all the criteria. right? They know the Torah. They're the ones entrusted with giving over the values. They go to the Beit HaMikdash. So there's a relationship between the Mikdash and the people because they live amongst the people, but they also do their turns in the Beit HaMikdash. Now, if it is the Levium, let's just go with this theory for a minute, okay, guys? Indulge me. If it is the Levium, why doesn't the Pasuk just say, appoint Levium to be your judges, right? just be straightforward about it. I want you guys to think about it a minute. Why not?
It may not only be the Levim, it might be someone who is highly scholarly and understanding of the law.
Exactly. So that's number one. It might also, right, extend to other people who weren't born into the Levim family. Also, could it be any Levi? Could it be anyone? Right? I think what the text is telling us is that it's not about a privileged class of people. It's about people who are going to be good shoftim. So it's not all the Levium. It's going to be Levium who you choose, because this text is speaking to the people. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha. You have to choose them. So the burden is on the people to make sure that the right people are judges. And it might be Levium and maybe it won't be Levium, right? But we don't automatically give the Levium a special privilege just because they're born into that class. And notice also how it's the second, that it's the people doing it. It's not the Kohen Gadol who appoints the Shoftim. It's not the king who appoints the Shoftim. It has to come from the people. The seat of justice needs to be in the city. It can't be in Yerushalayim. That's a really important point. Now, a second reading of the text actually reads Shoftim and Shotrim as two separate groups of people, okay? That they're judges and officials. And the text is purposely very vague, doesn't tell us who these people are. Perhaps these group of people are just wise, they're well known, maybe they have some intuition, people trust them, they go to them. What type of law are they using? We don't know, it's vague. Maybe it's local customs, maybe it goes village by village. The text here is purposely very vague, I think, because it's leaving room for every city to decide it for themselves. It's only the seconds here with that it explicitly states, no, ubata el hakohanim haleviim v'el hashofet. These are official positions, and they have to reside in Jerusalem. So we have this dichotomy set up between the two different court systems about who they are, who's doing the appointment, how they get their jobs. Now, this is a split from typical ancient Near East culture, where the king was usually also the prime judge. And we know from reading Sefer Shoftim and Malachim that this wasn't kept. In other words, the king did take on that power. Most famously, King Shlomo, Solomon, comes to mind here as someone who was a king and also a judge. And this text over here doesn't want that. There's no mention of the king involved. We don't want him mixing with our judicial system. What's fascinating also is that the Kohanim's role here is that of judges. We hear nothing in Sefer Devarim about their function in the Beit HaMikdash, because Devarim is not interested in what goes on behind closed doors in the Mikdash. That's not fascinating to us. It's not relevant. Sefer Devarim is all about how the people live and how society is structured. We don't care about the Mikdash. And so here we find out a new role, a new function. Kohanim aren't there just to serve in the Mikdash, but they're also part of the judicial system. And they work with the shofet, which automatically creates a check and balance, because we have now two groups of people involved in the same institution watching over each other, right? So we have this natural checks and balance in the system. Now, what is in that break in the text that I skipped over? Okay, I'm not going to keep it from you guys any longer. I know you're in suspense. It is basically all about doing avodah zarah. Take a look in the next text. it says, Lo tizbach l'Adonai Elohecha shor v'seh asher yelo boom kol davar ra ki to'avad. It's telling you how to do karbanot, how to not do karbanot. And then it tells you, pasuk bet, if you find someone that is doing bad stuff, in other words, not following the right rituals, and so it's talking about within rituals, within chukim, then what happens? Well, we have a process. Number one, v'hugad l'cha v'shemata. So someone comes to you, you have to hear them. After you listen to them, v'darashta hetev, you have to really do your research, look into it, make sure the accusation is correct, because you're telling on your neighbor, you come and you say, I think they're doing avodah zara. Well, you better be really, really sure about that. V'hinei emet nachon hadavar, you find out it's really true. Okay, I did my due diligence. Only then, al pi shnayim edim u'shlosha edim yumat hamet. Only then, if there are 2 or 3 witnesses, can you kill the person in capital punishment. And how does it proceed? Yad ha'edim tiyeh ba barishana. The edim are the first ones to throw the stones to kill him. And then the whole city comes out and they kill him. Okay, this is really wild. What is going on here? Why, first of all, why? Okay, let's start from the beginning. This text isn't telling you not to do avodah zara. We know that already. We've been talking about it for the last 2 classes, right? That belongs in the chukim section. That's nothing new. What this text is now introducing is procedure, right? And it's using the most severe crime as an example of capital punishment. And it's very clear that we take these accusations very seriously, and there's an organized system in place for how we deal with it. Why do the people have to kill that idolater? Why is it the Adim who first started and then everyone else picks up rocks? How do you think that helps the system? What does that do psychologically to the people?
It sure sets an example.
Oh yeah, right? If everyone's watching it happen, you're going to be really, really careful about doing idolatry in your city if you just saw someone get stoned.
I think it's meant to be participatory democracy, but it can turn bad on a dime. I mean,
yes,
people can be doing it for the wrong reasons, and so I'm not comfortable with it, but okay.
Yes, I hear your concerns. I think the participation actually could also have the opposite effect of what you're saying. It could really make you think twice about accusing someone of something if you have to be the one to kill them, be the executor, right? I mean, that's gruesome, that's horrifying. That could cause a person a lot of trauma. And so when you're going to accuse someone of something, you better be darn sure that you're correct, or else you're going to be the one to throw that first stone at them. And that also, right, tempers, I think, the natural inclination of people to want to get other people in trouble, because it's much easier to tell on someone and be like, okay, you, the court system, you take care of it. I don't want to see them anymore. You just dispose of them. But when you're actively involved and you get your hands dirty, that's a different story. But I think it is a very powerful ritual that they go through.
What about the gray zone where you know that someone is committing adultery, but you're not comfortable about the punishment?
That's really interesting, because it doesn't look like the punishment is up to the person who's doing the accusing.
Well,
It looks like, right, the punishment is set already, and I guess that will make you have to think twice about whether you want to turn them in, and you might decide not to. Because remember, we don't have policemen walking around here. We are actually relying on the city itself to maintain its own social order. So it's not like someone's going out around giving out tickets, right? Like nowadays, if you do something wrong, you're scared of the government. Here, you're actually scared of the people around you. It's a very different social structure. So now keep this in mind. Yeah. Any questions before we move on? I also want to point out that this section, as I mentioned before, I'm going to go back a slide, came right in between in that break. And the reason I think is because these type of laws are being dealt with on the local level, on that first tier. This is what's happening b'sha'arecha, in your gates. These type of things never make it to the Supreme Court in the Beit HaMikdash. And that's why it's situated right there in the center, and it breaks up the flow of the psukim. Now we're going to move on to the monarchy laws. Okay? When you go into the land and you settle it, then the people will say, Asima alai melech kekol hagoyim asher sivivotai. Appoint for us a king like all the nations that are around us. Now, this request only happens after they've already been in the land and settled the land. Keep that in mind. Then, Som tasim alecha melech. Fine, sure, you could have a king. Asher yivchar Adonai lehecha bo, that God is going to choose for you. Mikerav achecha tasim alecha melech. Lo tuchal letet alecha ish nachri. It has to be someone from amongst you, not from a foreigner. Why do you guys think that this only happens once they're in the land and the land is settled and the people ask for it? If there's supposed to be a king, why doesn't Moshe say, you're about to cross into the land of Yehoshua, okay, cross, unpack your suitcases, get ready, and then right there, appoint yourself a king, and that person can go and help you settle the land. Why is this like after all those stages?
Don't they want to be like other nations that have kings?
Yes, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, according to our story, no, God's the king. There's only one king and it's God. And,
Yes.
No.
Right. So it seems like there's almost like a negative connotation here, right? That like, this is like, oh, you want to be like all the other goyim? Okay, fine, I'll give it to you. But there's nothing positive here. It's not, right? It's not like a type of command that you shall do this and go ahead. It's more like if you request it, then you could have it. Why do you think it needs to be, though, after everything? What if the people demand a king right when they go into the land? Right? What if they want it a month after Moshe dying?
It kind of reminds me of when you start a new job. You first want to know the lay of the land before you start pointing your finger and saying this should be fixed and we should correct this. And, you have to see whether you're able to sort of accommodate without having somebody telling you what to do. But if you've lived there for a while, then you can figure it out.
Right. So it seems like this is like the last resort almost, that it's right. We don't really want a king, but after we've tried everything else, then maybe we'll give in. I'm also gonna throw in another idea here that we don't want this king settling the land because then he will think it's his land because he won it. And we don't want a king to have rights to the land. We want the land to belong to everyone. It's egalitarian, right? It makes God the conqueror of the land, not the king. So it evens the playing field from the very beginning. So this king who is appointed later, he's just like everyone else. He was part of the battle, just like your neighbor. Nothing special about him. So from the get-go, we're already limiting his position, his role within the nation. Let's continue on. So what does this king do? Okay. Well, Rak lo yarbe lo susim. He can't have too many horses. He also can't go back to Mitzrayim in order to get too many horses. That's the same category. He can't have too many wives. He can't have too much kesef v'zahav. Okay, that's a lot of things he can't have. Horses limits his military power. Saying that he can't have too many wives actually limits his power to forge international alliances with other countries by marrying their daughters. So we're now putting a limit on his diplomacy, and we limit his gold and silver, saying you can't overtax the people. You can't exploit them. Well, okay, that's a lot of things this king can't do. Well, what can he do? Is there anything he can do? Yes, there's one thing he can do. V'haya kishivto al kisei mamlachto v'katav lo et Mishnah haTorah hazot al sefer milifnei hakohanim halivim. He actually has to write this Mishnah Torah, which means a copy of Sefer Devarim. We don't know if it's talking about just this small little text or all the laws or the entire Devarim, but he has to write down Sefer Devarim. He has to do it under the very watchful eyes of the Kohanim and the Leviim, and then he has to carry it around with him. The Karabo Kol Yemei Chayav. He has to read it every day of his life in order to learn to fear God and to follow his mitzvot. Lebilti rum levavo miachav, lest his heart be lifted up above his brothers, and lest he think that he's above the law. Well, that's pretty radical, guys, right? Because usually when we think of a king, we think of someone rich and powerful. And here, the image of a king is actually a modest Torah scholar who lives in a modest home, right? He's sitting around his Sefer Torah reading all day in his kind of, dingy palace with not many wives around. This is not at all what we would have expected, right? Now, there will never be a king who follows this model. There never was, and there never will be. It goes against all human nature. But at least our text is striving for an ideal here. It's at least telling us the values of what it sees in a king. And are there any obligations that the people have to the king? None. No obligations. It doesn't say they have to obey him at all. It doesn't say you have to follow this king. It says they have to follow the Shoftim and they have to follow the Kohanim, and we're going to see the Nevi'im, but no, not the king. In fact, the king has to obey God. So the only restrictions are on the king, not on the people. Let's remember also that in most societies, the king was considered a deity, right? He was divine. And these people are coming from Mitzrayim, where Paro was also a god. And so their model of a king is the complete opposite of the model being put forth here. And we spoke about 2 classes ago how Moshe negates his role as a leader. And here Moshe is also negating the role of a king. And we're really left wondering, well, what's the point of a king then? And I think that's the point, that we're left wondering that, right? You're supposed to stop and say, what? Why on earth would they appoint a king? This is what he does. And that's the point. Now, the next section is going to deal with a Navi. Okay. So here we have the other section, okay? When you go into the lands, don't get caught up in witchcraft and ritual sacrifice and sorcery and enchanters and soothsayers, all these things. No. God hates it. He hates that stuff. Take a look at the highlighted pasuk Tetvav. Navi mikerbecha me'achecha kamoni, like me, says Moshe, a Navi from you who is like me, yakim lecha Adonai Elohecha elav tashmiun. God is going to appoint you another Moshe, right? So Moshe is saying, guys, I'm about to die, but don't worry, you're going to have more of me. There are going to be other Nevi'im in the future. And he then goes on to says, this is exactly what you asked for. You guys said that you want an intermediary between you and God because you were too overwhelmed by the divine experience, and you got one. And therefore, in the future, Navi yakim lehem mikarav achechem kamocha v'natati dvarai mipi v'diber alehem et kol asher etzaveni. So Hashem says, fine, I'm going to appoint a Navi. Now, there's a danger with a Navi, because we have to be very careful. What if there's a Navi asher lo yishma el dvarai asher dabar b'shmi anochi edrosh mi'imo? What if there's a Navi who's not following my law and who's telling you to do things like avodah zarah? Well, then you have to kill that Navi. But hold on a second. How are we supposed to know? Right? We have a Navi. It's really confusing, right? a Navi and they're a false Navi, or they're speaking in another God's name. I mean, this is putting a lot of burden on the people. Don't worry, says Moshe, there's a test you could do. Okay? Because he says, "V'chi tomar b'levecha, echa neidat tavar," how do we know? He says, well, Asher diber hanavi b'shem Adonai, v'lo yeh hadavar v'lo yavo, hu hadavar asher lo diber Adonai, v'zadon dibra hanavi lo tagor imenu, which means, well, if he says something and he's predicting the future, and it happens, you know he's a real Navi. And if it doesn't happen, you know he's a false Navi. What's problematic about this?
You have a 50-50 chance and you have to wait long enough. When it does happen, he says, see, I told you.
Exactly. What are you supposed to wait 5 years to see if he's a real Navi or not? Right? This is really confusing. Like, how long are we supposed to wait? 50 years, and then we go back and say, oh yeah, he was a real Navi. You could live now. He's probably already dead, right? I mean, it's ludicrous. Also, sometimes a Navi could say something and then things could change. What if it's a Navi who's saying that you're going to be destroyed and the Beit HaMikdash will be destroyed, and let's say they do tshuva, then it won't happen. So this is really confusing. So I want to delve into this a little more. There's actually a lot to say about this, and we don't have time, so I'm going to scratch the surface. What type of Navi are we talking about? Who is this person? What is their role? Moshe's role so far has been being lawgiver and also miracle worker. Okay? He has this dual nature to him as a Navi. As far as a lawgiver is concerned, Moshe is basically saying, there's no one who's going to bring you a new law. There's not going to be another divine revelation. There's not going to be a new Har Sinai. So whatever Navi is coming talking about laws, it has to fit exactly in line with everything I've been telling you in Sefer Devarim. So in a way, when Moshe says, there will be other Nevi'im like me, that's actually not true. It's impossible. There will and there cannot be another Navi like Moshe, because there can never be another lawgiver. The law was already given. Nothing can ever change. And as far as the Navi who does miracles, well, Moshe is more open to that possibility. As long as that Navi is following his law, he kind of doesn't care. And he's saying, just wait and see, and you'll see. Does it really matter? It doesn't really matter. In a way, what I see Moshe doing here, it's kind of making both of these things impossible. Like, there won't ever be a Navi. There's not going to be a numerical worker, and there's not going to be another lawgiver. Right? So it's a very fascinating thing. I think what Moshe is saying is, okay, you guys, I know that human nature, what do you want to do? Everyone likes soothsayers and going to fortune tellers and magic tricks. That's human nature. That's how he starts off his parak, by saying, you're going to want to go to all these people. And Moshe really believes, I think, that it's not necessary. You don't need to divine the future. There's no need for that. But if you want it, it has to be at least someone who's following my mitzvot and my Torah. And then fine, do what you want. You want to go and find out about your future? Find out your future. Who cares? In a sense, he's also negating the role of a Navi, right? So what Moshe has done here is negate everyone's role, right? We haven't really seen any powerful institutions. If we take a look at everything we studied so far, we see that these institutions all have checks and balances on each other, because the shofet is residing in the mikdash with the kohanim, so they're watching each other. The kohanim are dependent on the people to survive. They don't have any money. The Navi, if he's a false Navi, can get killed, back to the shoftim, who had killed him. The king has to write a Sefer Torah under the eyes of the Kohanim, who also have to teach him the law. And he also has to follow it, which means that he has to follow the shoftim. The king is not a Navi. He has to actually hire a Navi if he ever wants to find out what the future is, right? And so we have here a whole system of checks and balances where everyone's looking over everyone's shoulder. And in the middle of it all is the nation, the Am. They're the ones tasked with making sure that these institutions thrive and that no one becomes too powerful. They are doing the appointing. Okay, and that's a super radical point that Sefer Devarim is making, especially if we consider the ancient Near East context where this was not the case. It gives the people power over themselves to rule, and it empowers them, and it puts the responsibility on them to create a just society. You can't expect someone else to do it. It has to be on you. You need to step up and make sure that there's tzedek and mishpat. Now, that's exactly what we're going to see with the first mitzvah that we look at. Okay? And what we're going to do is go through some laws and see who's doing what and where they're doing it and how the institutions work together. So we're going to do like a few case studies. Let's take a look at the first one. The first one is an Ir Miklat. It's a city of refuge. Okay? So when you go into the land and you settle the land, you have to make 3 special cities called an Ir Miklat. And those cities are there in case someone kills someone by accident. So it has to be by accident. They could run to that city and the family of the victim can't touch them. They are safe there. It's a safe house. Now, what happens if a man, ish, so nelareu, he hates him and he lies waiting for him? So this is premeditated murder, right? And he kills his neighbor and then he runs to one of these cities. Well, no. The Ziknei Iro, the Zikanim, can take him out of that city and hand him over to the family because he doesn't qualify to be in an Ir Miklat. Okay? Now, Ir Miklat, I would think, should belong in the section that we just did before about the judicial system, about the judges. Why is it here? Why isn't it in those two prakim ago that we just did about Shoftim and Shotrim? What is this about here? And I think that this is very different.
Is this?
This text is addressing, here, yes, please speak.
Yeah, I was just saying, is this the level where we put responsibility on ourselves to make a judgment call?
I'm going to actually flip it around. Sometimes the people can make mistakes. And sometimes, there's extrajudicial law where the people don't follow the institutions. What if there's a case of a family and, someone accidentally kills someone and the family is torn and they're upset about it and they want to murder that person and get their revenge? What happens? Who do you follow? And we have this tension. We have tension between the clan that might practice like blood vengeance and institutions that practice capital punishment. And institutions differentiate between murder and accidental manslaughter. But it could be that families, they're enraged, they're upset, they've just been through this trauma. They might not follow the institutions. And by the way, this is still common even in some Bedouin societies. I was just reading a text about it, that if someone is accidentally killed, the 5 closest relatives of the murderer could be killed in revenge, right? I mean, I'm assuming that this isn't the case, under Israeli law, but like this is still alive in some societies today. But Ir Miklat is essentially a compromise. It's a compromise. It's saying, yeah, the central government has control over the judicial system, and we protect the life of someone who accidentally kills another person, and he has to live in an Ir Miklat, and hopefully that's enough for the victim's family. But we're also acknowledging human nature and the reality of blood vengeance. So we're basically saying that we understand human nature, but we also believe in strong institutions. We need a strong judicial system, but we know that sometimes things are going to be dealt with on the clan level. Notice here, Vishalchu Ziknei Iro, it's the Zikanim who come and take him out. It's not the Shoftim, it's not the Shotrim, it's not the Melech, it's not the Kohen. The people have to work that out.
It also serves as like when kids are naughty and you give them a timeout. It gives both of you a chance to sort of Make the
Cool
decision
off.
in a cooler, with a cooler mind.
100%. Yes. Now we're going to see the next example in the next parak is about them going to war. I'm actually not going to read these psukim inside, it's too long, but I want to point out that when they go to the war, okay, the Kohen first comes and he has to inspire the people. He gives a pep rally, you could do it, don't be afraid. Then the Shotrim come and they have another job. And they say, everyone, we have to offer you exemptions. If you built a new house, if you have a new vineyard, if you have a new wife, if you're too scared. So they come with their role. And lastly, Bnei Yisrael have to appoint Sarei Tzvaot Berosh Ha'am, these captains. That comes from the people. The people are the ones leading the war. And what I think is important here is that, again, we see the Kohanim don't reside in the Mikdash. They're out with the people. They're in the battlefield, right? Again, they're not this privileged class who live in an ivory tower. No, they're out there with the people, putting on war paint with them. That's where they are. And we see here also the Shotrim. They're not just about administering justice. They're also there because they know the laws. That's their job. They have to be very well versed in the laws, and they could tell you who's exempt. And this, to me, again, is a perfect example of seeing how these institutions serve the people and they empower the people. And the people are the ones going out to war. Who is noticeably missing from this text that you would expect to find in a war? The king. Exactly. He should be the one appointing and saying who should go to war and who shouldn't, and making all the plans. But no, it's the people. It's Sarei Tzvaot Berosh Ha'am. That's who's leading them in war. Let's jump right now to another example. Okay, all these examples are giving us this like really broad understanding of Sefer Devarim's ideology when it comes to building a society. Here we have a case of an unsolved mystery murder. You find a dead body, okay, and it's in the Sadeh, and no one knows who killed him. Okay, we have no story to tell. Then the Zikanim and the Shoftim, I forgot to highlight them. Sorry, I have to go back and do that. They should be orange. The Zikanim and the Shoftim have to measure that dead body to see which is the closest city that it goes to. Then that city that is the closest have to take the Zikanim, the elders, the respected people, out of the city. And they do this very strange ritual, okay, where they take a calf and they bring it out to this valley and they break its neck. And then, okay, it's very strange. And then the Kohanim step in after they've already done it. And they come and they like ritualize it, okay? And they bless it in God's name, okay? And then the Zikanim who are there wash their hands over the calf's neck. Again, it's like a ritual purity. They're saying we are not guilty of this murder. And then they say, our hands are not dirty with this blood. We didn't spill this blood, but and we didn't see what happened. We have no idea how he died. And this is a kapara from the word Yom Kippur. It's an atonement. Okay, this is really, really interesting. Okay. First of all, who takes responsibility of this unsolved mystery?
The heifer.
The Canaan, the people.
heifer.
The heifer, right. He's the one who suffers in the end.
Yeah.
The poor heifer. Yes. But it's the Zikanim who start the ritual. They don't wait for the Kohen to show up. Okay, because they take responsibility as the elders of a city. And this ritual seems to actually put the blame on the city. It seems to indicate that they did something wrong. They were responsible for this murder. How? What are we now saying about the responsibility of a city?
You're responsible for for influencing the moral fiber of your members, you know.
100%.
It's
The
a
Zakanim
collective
are
ethos.
exactly, that everyone here is responsible for the morality of the city. And I'm going to take it one step further. They're also responsible for the safety of a city, right? Murders should not happen. Let's say this poor man who was murdered didn't have a place to sleep last night and he was vulnerable. That's on the city. They have to make sure there aren't people on the street. They have to make sure there aren't murderers. They have to make sure if there is a murderer that he's put away. They have to ensure everyone's safety. So not only are the people responsible for maintaining justice, but they're also responsible for maintaining the social values of the city. And this is really, really profound, right? And you see here that we brought in the Kohanim because we needed someone to do that kapara, and that's their role. But they're working hand in hand with the Zakanim. Now, this sounds great. The fact that we say that everyone has to be safe in a city, and our road and our streets, right, need to be a place where people feel safe and they know they're not going to get murdered, right? But there's one location then that doesn't have any checks and balances or doesn't have a safety network. Where are we scared that someone might get killed? Where do we not have an extra set of eyes? That's the home, inside the home itself. There could be violence in the house on the most intimate level. Who's watching out for that? And that leads me to the very next text, which is Ben Sora Umora. What happens here? Ki leish ben Sora Umora. So when a man has a very stubborn and rebellious son, and he doesn't listen to his parents, right? And they keep trying to get him to do the right thing, and he's just totally defiant. They have to bring him out of the house. They give him over to the Zakanim. And then they tell Zakanim, he is a Ben Saromero, and he's not listening to us. And then only after that, the city shall stone him. Now, the Zakanim have to first verify that. Right? They're not just going to take the parents at their word. What we essentially do is we actually take away parental authority to punish children. We say, you can't decide that your son is horrible and therefore you're going to kill him, and then tomorrow no one's going to know where Avram went. No. We want to make sure that you're not the crazy ones and that you're not abusive parents. So we hand him over to the Zakanim, and the Zakanim have to check it out and make sure that it's right, that it's as severe as it is. Now, we then stone him, which I mean, I don't know who isn't this really assaults our modern sensibilities. This sounds horrible, right? So what's going on here? Why would they be doing this? Because it's not just the family's problem, it's the society's problem. This goes back to what we were just talking about, right? This isn't a kid who's just chutzpahdik. This isn't a kid who doesn't listen to his parents. This is someone who threatens the moral fabric of the entire society. This is someone who's doing, yes. Mm-hmm.
How do they make the determination what's the cause of the stubbornness of the rebellious son? Because what if what they're living in the house is inconsistent parenting, which leads to kids acting out?
Yes.
So the elders, I mean, I don't know what kind of social work they do in family assessment, but you could be stoning the wrong perpetrator in this situation.
Totally. So that's why I know I'm reading into the text here, but that's why I see it that they have to take him and bring him to the Zakanim and to the Sha'ar Mikamo, to the city. I think there needs like it's almost like a waiting period, right? That get him out of the house, get him out of their influence. Let's see what he's like when he doesn't have his parents. Maybe he'll shape up a little. So we give him a chance. So I do read it. I know I'm reading into it because it doesn't say that explicitly, but I do think that implicitly in the text, there is this idea of we need to take him out of his environment and judge him for who he is. Now, if he's judged to be someone who's really going to threaten the fabric of their society, then he actually needs to be killed, because as we're seeing in all these texts, is that there's this very delicate balance, right? We saw that on the institutional level between the four modes of leadership, and now we're seeing it more on the micro level within the city itself. We also have this delicate value that families live with the social contract between other families, that when I step outside, I will not be killed by your crazy son. That's part of our social contract. So when one person threatens that and throws it all off, well, we need to get rid of it. We need to get rid of that threat. So I think that like it's not as offensive as it was when we first read these psukim, but put in, when we put it within the context of what we're trying to do, it's a little less severe. So speaking about balance and the fabric of society, the next set of laws are going to talk a lot about boundary markers and what keeps this machine running. And it doesn't like things that threaten the structure and the system. And here we're going to look at some of those laws that to us before seemed really, really strange, and now might take on a different meaning. So we start with Lo yeh kli gever al isha, v'lo yilbash gever simlat isha, ki tovat Adonai Elohecha kol ha'se'eleh. So a woman can't wear anything, a kli of a gever, and gever here it doesn't say the word ish, it doesn't say man. Gever is masculine, okay? It's a gender description. So a woman can't wear anything, even a kli, that's associated with the masculine, whether it's weapons or tools or clothing, whatever it is. And a man can't wear a simla, doesn't say a kli, it says a simla of an isha. A simla in Tanakh is usually like an outer cloak. It's like a jacket of a woman. Now, why? What is so offensive about this? Who really cares? Okay, really, who cares? One classic way of understanding it is that this will lead to inappropriate socialization, which can lead to inappropriate relationships, because the very next parak that we're going to look at are all about inappropriate relationships. Okay, for example, actually in the previous parak that we skipped, it was about Esha Yifat Toar, which is a captive woman. It was about having a second wife. Coming right up, we're going to talk about adultery, about rape. So if we look at this within the context of inappropriate sexual relationships, then we could read this as we don't want genders mixing because we don't want to get to any of those points, right? We don't want to be in a situation of adultery. But I think there's another way to view it, because but I think that way might be correct, and that might be true. But I think actually that if we look within our text, what's coming up right now, what are all these next laws about? Well, one of them I forgot to put in that was right before was about not crossing your neighbor's boundary. Don't separate a mother bird from her young. If you build a second floor in your house, you have to put a fence around your roof. So you're putting up a border separating between private and public. Don't mix any species or plants or animals. Don't mix any wool and linen. So if you're here, the common word here is mixing, mixing, mixing over and over again. These are all about mixing. And this is all about maintaining boundaries. And that's really what this cross-dressing pasuk is about. It's not literally about trying on a piece of clothing, right? We're actually just talking about mixing genders. Now, why is it so important to maintain these strict categories? Why is this text so concerned about boundaries? And many anthropologists see these type of laws as an attempt to maintain a social structure that ensures the survival of the greater community, especially in ancient times. Because if a society relies on the smaller kin groups, which are comprised of family units who are farmers and they divide up the land, they divide up the jobs amongst gender lines, then when gender roles are challenged, right, it creates a crack in the system and the entire structure might fall apart. They need everyone in their lane. They want to make sure that these roles are enforced, because the system is delicate and everything is resting on the system working. And so I think it's important that we not moralize these type of laws. This isn't about ethical behavior. It's about maintaining the survival of the community. It's a real concern that they have, that they don't want to be threatened with someone, messing up something that they are doing really well and it's working for everyone. Sometimes these psukim are taken out of context and not read correctly within the whole parak. But I think it's clear if you're reading this over and over again, it's just saying boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Stop mixing things. Now, the next, by the way, you could take it or leave it. That's just my theory. Feel free to challenge it. I'm trying to understand why these type of laws would be in this section.
I'm just thinking that there's a lack of faith in the grassroots people of the village or of the general population, that you have to be so specific and so limiting to ensure that your moral code is actually carried out. I just, that's how I'm reading this. I mean, I understand your explanation was beautiful and clear, but it makes me bristle a little bit that they don't trust people to buy into the core value, that they have to check all these little things.
So what I see is that there's a lot of fear, right? There's a lot of fear here that the system won't survive unless it's maintained the way it is. That's what I see driving it. And I imagine that in those times when, everything is dependent on the grain being planted and being brought in, and the women then doing the second job and then taking the grain and making it into bread and like all these tasks, right? I imagine that if that didn't continue, then there was a crack in their society and it was quite dangerous and threatening. So yes, I agree with you. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it's 5 o'clock. Guys, can I have a few more minutes?
Yes.
Is that all right with everyone?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, the next few prakim deal with exactly what you would expect, which is like, a bride that wasn't a virgin, and adultery and rape and improper sexual relationships and incest, which I think is really important because they want the family unit to be desexualized. Because if that family unit has to work as a group, then we have to take sexuality out of the home and we have to protect the most vulnerable people in society inside of the home. We have intermarriage, which is maintaining the values of community. I think it's important to note intermarriage isn't bad here because of DNA. It's bad because of the values. And this has to go back with boundaries, right? And mixing. So it's all about maintaining the code of law. Adultery, divorce, if a woman gets divorced from her husband, marries someone else, she can't remarry her first husband if she gets divorced again, because it looks like adultery. Again, it's about those boundaries. Even if it's not adultery, it looks like adultery. We have very strict laws about boundaries. And finally, the last thing we end with is this ritual of bikurim. Bikurim is a ritual where the farmer takes his first fruits and he goes to the Beit HaMikdash. And it's a really fascinating ritual. I'm not going to read through it all right now, but it's performative. It's theater. He goes and he takes his basket and he puts it in the Beit HaMikdash. And he goes to the Kohen and he says, and the Kohen, by the way, gives him a script. It's like giving him a little index card. And he has to say, I came to this land that God gave me. Now, he didn't come to this land. He could have been living there for 400 years, but he is pretending that he is a new immigrant to the land. Then after he says that, it's like, cue, okay, Kohen, you do your part. The Kohen then takes it. He takes that basket. He has to put it on the Mizbeach. Then he goes back to him and he says, okay, next part. And then he has to say, Arami oved avi, vayered Mitzrayim, vayagar sham b'mtei ma'at, vayusham l'goy gadel atzum v'rav. I'm not going to read the psukim. You should recognize these from the Haggadah. They're right. We say them every year during the Seder. And he goes through his entire national history. That I was in Mitzrayim and we were oppressed and we cried out to God and God heard us and answered and brought us out of Mitzrayim with great miracles and brought us to this amazing land of Eretz Avachula V'Dvash. And here I am today bringing my first fruits. Then he takes the fruits, puts it before God, he bows down and he is very happy and rejoiceful. So First of all, this is a ritual. So what is it doing in our section, right? It should have been in this middle section. But I think here it's not a ritual because he's bringing food and he's feeding the Kohanim and Leviim who don't have anything. It's actually tzedakah. It's forced tzedakah. If you remember a while back, I said, like, I gave you guys a Venn diagram that sometimes rituals and ethics overlap. This is the perfect example where it has ritualized a ethical law that, yes, you need to give charity. We're going to tell you how to give charity, and we're going to actually give you a script for giving charity. And this person's personal drama becomes enmeshed with the national story. And every year he has to put on a play that shows that his life has historical significance. That's profound, right? You're not just a regular farmer from up north, from the Golan. No. You're part of a story. You're part of a brit. You are the culmination of this brit that God gave to Abraham. And you are now acting, your bringing of the fruits is an act of worshiping God and of helping your brothers. And who brings it? Everyone. Men, women, poor, rich, the Navi, the king, it doesn't matter. If you have a tree, you are bringing these bikurim. Right? And to me, this is a remarkable text. It really is, because as we've seen in other places in Devarim, that there are no constraints in time and place. It's timeless. Right? This farmer is living in this elevated state of him actually going through Mitzrayim and going into the lands. He's retelling that story over and over, and his son and daughter will tell the same story. And this text, as I said, lives on the Haggadah. It's a testament to Chazal for keeping these Jewish texts and the ethos behind it alive, even after the Beit HaMikdash in exile, that we still have this core text. So now, to wrap up this entire section, if I had to summarize Mishpatim in a few lines, I would say the following. I would say that this section of Mishpatim tells us that you need to be a strong citizen. You have to be engaged, educated, and proactive. It tells us that the Torah respects your private property, your sacred relationships, and your strict boundaries. Sefer Devarim also acknowledges human nature and works with human nature, and it sets up an ideal while still being realistic. And that's really, really important. And everyone, as we know, has access to these laws. They're not in the hands of the elites. They're not behind the walls of the Beit HaMikdash. This is in Bisharecha. Over and over again, I've tried to emphasize that word, Bisharecha, Bisharecha. It's in your sha'ar, it's in your gates. And this is quite the revolution if we think about the 6th century when this was put together, this text, right? When normally only scribes and priests had access to text. And here everyone has access to this text, and they could, they're watching over you. Priest and Navi and king, we know what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. And this becomes the entire brit. Hayom hazeh Adonai Elohecha. On this day, God gives you these laws to watch over them. Elecha b'dercha v'lishmor chukav u'mishpotav. Right? Again, u'mishpatav. The 3 main sections that we've been dealing with. And only this will make you an am segula, kasher diber lach lishmor kol mitzvotav, and God will make you, right, an am kadosh. This is what separates you. Doing this Torah section, the 3 parts, both the devotion to God, the rituals, and the ethical, that is what makes you God's cherished people amongst all the other nations. So now we are going to continue. Last class is going to be the end of Sefer Devarim, which is quite emotional because Moshe is going to give his farewell. It's a very emotional speech that he gives. He says, I'm about to die. Parshat Hazino, he writes a beautiful poem. He blesses all the different Shvatim and gives them each their own individualistic bracha. And then we see he transfers the power to Yehoshua and he dies. And that will wrap up the entire Sefer Devarim. So I hope by the end of our series together, you will have a really, really nice overview of the entire Sefer Devarim. Thank you, everyone, for learning with me today.
Thank
Are there
you.
any comments?
I've been, this is not a good comment. I love this class, but last week you put forward something that I've been thinking about all week that made me so happy. That you commented on God is one for us.
Mhm.
That's very powerful.
It is.
For
It's a radical
us.
idea.
Right. It allows
Right.
that something that's very important that
Yes.
Jews
Yes, it's-
don't necessarily haven't embraced.
Yes, there's a lot of pluralism within Sefer Devarim, that other people do things their way, but this is not for you. You were born into a brit. It's a very pluralistic Sefer. Yes.
I love the thought of that, thinking about that.
Wonderful. Any other comments before we leave?
I have
No.
one more comment. The building of fences, so many of the laws seem to be more what Gloria sort of, I think, alluded to, protecting the ideals. So all these other laws are created around it. Why
Yes.
you can't do certain things. It's not that you couldn't do them.
Absolutely.
It's if the string broke and you went to fix the guitar on Shabbos when you were playing, you're violating. These things are very hard for me to embrace.
I completely identify with your sentiment. I think it's, it could feel oppressive at times. It could feel overbearing. But I think that if we're viewing it within the context of setting an ideal and like what it takes to maintain that ideal, then it makes sense. What that is going to look like in your personal life might be different, because again, Sefer Devarim is all about having this like idealistic goal, but then also acknowledging human nature, right? So it's like what we saw with the king. Yeah, we would like the king to be like that. We know it's never going to happen. It's impossible. So we also allow for a little bit of individuality. We allow for, human nature to enter, but I think we still strive for some sort of ideal here. But
So
there is a tension.
yeah.
There's a tension. I feel it. I understand what you're saying.
Shutness, for example, has tortured me from the beginning of trying to understand that and watching genetically modified foods come into existence. And you wonder, was the wisdom of that, don't go there. It's not good, these GMOs. Don't mix this with that, but so many more people are being fed with that and food supplies. And where do we sit with it's I mean, you have to think about, if you carry it in your heart, all this stuff, get very nervous about things like that.
Right. So that's why in my personal life, I like to think about the meta values behind the mitzvot. I think the meta values are more important than the details in the text. And we have to understand, what is the law here trying to tell us about living an ethical, moral life? And then how can that be reapplied to our modern day?
Beautiful.
That's an important thing to constantly keep in your mind.
The real challenge, it seems to me, is that the context, the historical context of this text is what, 8 centuries, many centuries ago.
Many more, yeah.
And as society has evolved, or let's just say changed, the context has changed and the laws need to be understood within the context of our time. So
100%.
mixing genders, for instance, at the time in which this was promulgated, is not the same as the gender discussions of today. And
I completely agree. To me,
therefore,
that is the role of Torah Shabbat al Peh, It's not to get stuck in the text in its ancient context, but rather to keep it alive and to keep on going. Now, in this class, I'm actually avoiding all conversation of rabbinic discourse because I'm actually looking through the opposite. I'm actually trying to understand it in the ancient Near East context of what would have been like living in the 6th century reading this text.
Right.
But this is biblical law, and we don't follow biblical law. We follow rabbinic law.
Mhm.
This is not the source of our laws. And it's very important to remember that Chazal have added on so much to this that some of these laws are actually unrecognizable,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And we're almost
absolutely.
talking about 2 different law systems.
Okay, good. So the next course will be rabbinical law.
Yeah,
Excellent.
we can do that.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Thank
Very
you so
good.
much. Koyach.
Thank you.
Koyach.
Thank you very much, guys.
Wonderful
It was a
class,
pleasure as
wonderful.
always. I'll see you next week. Take care.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Thank you.
Mhm.